So, hi everyone, I'm Frank Clifford at the London School of Astrology. This is a series of interviews with expert astrologers to discover how they approach client work and how they actually prioritize, synthesize, and interpret birth charts. We'll also discover how they go about communicating that information to their clients, and each session will introduce the astrologer's approach, and then we'll be looking at a chart with them to see this approach in practice. Each master astrologer is giving their time for an important cause, and the LSA is donating £150 per session to the charity selected by the astrologer. Our guest today, John Marchesella, has chosen the Matthew Shepherd Foundation, a charity that aims to inspire individuals, organizations, and communities to erase hate and to embrace the dignity and equality of all people. So thank you so much for that, John. Let me introduce you to John. John has been a professional astrologer since 1976. I'm allowed to say that because it's on his website, and is known for his accessible, down-to-earth approach to astrology. He's been long involved with the New York chapter of NCGR, and is also a bereavement counselor and certified psychotherapist. Check out his website, www.astrojohn.com, for classes, articles, and consultations. So a warm welcome, John. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Now, can you give us an idea of the amount of your working life these days that's focused on astrology?
Oh, I'm very fortunate. 100%.
Okay.
100% of my work, and I would say about 95% of my day.
So
Especially these days in the middle of a pandemic.
So yeah, indeed, yes. With the counseling, the psychotherapy has taken a back seat in the last number of years.
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
Actually, a long time ago. I started my psychotherapy practice early in the 80s. And I did that for 5 full years until I realized I was much happier as an astrologer and a little better at being an astrologer. So I closed my therapy practice and went full-time into astrology again, as I had been before. And the timing was particularly good because it was right at the time when Nancy Reagan was scandalously found out to have a White House astrologer. And at that point, everybody could have an astrologer. So back then, any astrologer worth his weight got a big boon in business. So what evolved, however, over the years is that my astrology practice became more counseling, more therapeutic, more psychological, so that now, although I call myself an astrologer, and I prefer to be called a predictive astrologer, the work actually has fused. I don't make a line anymore between my counseling and my astrology, or between my natal interpretations or predictive interpretations. For me, prediction is just the happening of the natal horoscope. It's just the manifestation of the natal horoscope. So I don't think we can talk about natal astrology without also talking about prediction. And the only thing that we can predict is the natal potential. So all of that now, many, many years later, has all fused for me.
So before a client comes to see you, and I'm assuming you have regulars over the times, and I've you're one of those names over the years. I've been at interesting parties with people, and when they find out I'm an astrologer, they say, "Do you know John?" And I say, "Not really," but it's amazing the people I've met over the years who are regulars of yours. What if somebody's new, or even if somebody's been to you for a while? How do you set it up? What would you tell somebody who perhaps has never had an astrology session before? A little bit about how you approach things.
You know, I actually don't. I let them do that. Again, I'm very fortunate. I think that the clients who refer other clients, those people do the talking for me. They'll tell the prospective client, go to John, Maybe they'll say, this is what he'll do. He can help you with this. Sometimes they will give instructions, ask him questions, don't ask him questions, don't say anything, let him do all the talking. Of course, I always find these things out after the fact. So they've been briefed by the client who is referring them. When the client comes in for a reading, whether it's a first-time client or a repeat client, I'll always start by saying, do you come with any questions? Was there anything that you would like to say or know before we begin? Or for a repeat client, I'll say, has anything occurred, anything different or unusual in your life since the last time that we spoke? Invariably, the first-time client is going to wind up saying, no, I'm just here out of curiosity, or no, I've never done this before and I just wanted to see what it was like, or usually that's the answer. Every once in a while, the first-time client will surprise me with a specific question or a list of questions, but they usually come not wanting to influence me. If they tell me that, no, I'd rather not influence you, my answer to them is, I'll give you the phone number of my mother and my father. You can talk to them about how easy it is to influence me, which is not very. And where I'll begin the reading, whether it's a new client or a repeat client, I usually begin actually with the predictive work. And the reason why I do that is because I feel they're here for a reason. And they want me to know that. They want me to show them, I know why you're here. You're having a relationship crisis or a career crisis, or you're feeling stuck, or this is the matter, or that's the matter. And I find that that does two things right off the bat. It wins their trust and it makes them relax. I used to be, years and decades ago, I used to be very orderly. Let's do the natal potential, and then we'll talk about what's going on and what's going to come up for you. And I realized that the whole time that I was talking about the natal potential first, they were kind of distracted because they weren't here to find out who they are. They're here to find out, when am I going to change the job? When am I going to meet somebody? Are we going to break up, or whatever it might be? So once I realized that, I tried flipping it, and it just worked so much better. And for me, it worked better for me. We all develop our own way of working. And if we're fortunate to be able to do this for decades and decades and decades, then I would hope the style would change and people change. The kinds of clients that I get now, completely different personality type than 40 years ago. And of course, astrology has evolved and the reputation of astrology has evolved. So what I do is get the prediction off the table. Let's just take care of that. And then I backtrack and go into, why is this happening? Not only what purpose is it serving in your life, but what's the potential in your character that is either making this happen or is being asked to grow? What part of your character is being emphasized and why? So they actually wind up leaving here with the information about who they are and what's coming up for them. But I gave it to them in a way they didn't expect.
So when you start with the predictive work, what does that really mean? Does that mean you're looking at the transits, the progressions, or the consultation chart? What is it that you look at?
Transits, progressions. I'm big into secondary progressions. And when I say transits, it automatically includes eclipses. Those are the things that I really work with. And before the reading, I've got it in my head what the progressions are, and the way that I define progressions, what the person is ready for, what they're ready to have happen. I could see the transits on the chart right in front of me. So I know all of that. I refer to it as cycle, the cycle that you're in. And I keep it very simple for them. In fact, years ago, on the advice of my teacher, Joanna Shannon, she told us, don't mention the astrology. It is not their job to learn astrology. It's your job to translate the astrology. So that really went deep in my head. But as the years go by, and especially now because of the internet, everybody knows a little bit about astrology. So they kind of want to hear some of the language, but I keep it simple, even though in my head, I know their progressions, their eclipses, I know all their transits, but I'll keep it simple by saying, Saturn's moving through your third house now. That's the name of the cycle that you're in. And da 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 da. Maybe once in a while, I'll mention, oh, and there's an eclipse that will be happening here, because eclipses are always in the news these days. But I'll try to keep the astro lingo kind of simple so that they don't get too confused, or I don't want them thinking that they're here for an astrology lesson.
No, no, indeed. And what's your take in terms of looking at particularly strong transits, or when you describe where they're at or why they've come to see you? What's your feeling about how much power they have to negotiate that? How do you deal with that? What's your take on that?
Well, I try to phrase everything with the purpose that this is serving in your life. And once they can understand that whatever is going on or what's on the horizon is to serve a purpose, I think that makes a person feel empowered. I think then it just automatically lets them know, is this something I can do something about? And if so, we'll talk about what you might possibly do. Or is the thing to do to just wait and see? Is the purpose of this time calling for a more receptive approach, a more yin approach, let's say? And the best thing to do is let Mother Nature take its course, and we'll see. Is it a time for action? Is it a time to wait and see? So that then lets them know what they can do about it, even if what they can do about it is nothing.
And so then it goes into the counseling aspect of getting back to the natal chart to understand what they need, their reactions. Is that how you incorporate it these days?
Right. I let them know that this is hitting this part of their character or that part of the character. Maybe it is hitting a conflict that they always live with, and now that conflict is becoming more conscious. Maybe something is hitting a talent, some ability, and it's time to make use of that resource to put it into effect. And I use my counseling background to try to communicate that.
Great, thank you. In terms of the people that have influenced you over the decades, who would you say, apart from the teacher you mentioned, who would you say that you've read that influence you, or seen? Who are the great influences on your type of astrology?
Well, I was very fortunate to get into astrology during sometimes what we call the golden age, back in the 70s, when Rob Hand was first coming out with his books, and Liz Green. The second book that I ever read on astrology was Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. And I don't know how many times I have reread that book. Stephen Arroyo was coming out with his books at that time. So it was a wonderful time to be learning astrology. And then, of course, once I got the foundation with what was then the contemporary astrologers, then I went back, and going back for my generation meant reading people like Carter, CEO Carter, and Mark Edmund Jones, Alan Leo, and then moving forward from there. In my personal life, Joanna Shannon was my first teacher, And Betty Lundstedt and Lenore Cantor were really the people who influenced me.
Right, right. And was there any, I mean, I'm sure there's probably a few here, but any memorable piece of advice you received that you passed on to clients about the cosmos or your take on things? Is there something you find yourself repeating?
There's a lot about breathing, especially these days. Um, of course, it's quite phenomenal. Ever since our election 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years now, um, everyone wants to know about what's happening in the world. I don't think there's a single client since 2016 who has not asked me something about the world, and that is phenomenal. That never happened before. Oh, there would be people in the past who might make political comments about this president or that president, or this new law, that new law, um, and events, of course, things like 9/11 and why is that happening and so forth. And we could even go way back to the 80s when AIDS was breaking out and just changing the face of everything. So there are times, certainly, when I have spoken about things of social issues, and I try to put it into an astrological context, because Pluto is changing sign, or Saturn and Pluto are doing this, or Saturn and Uranus, or whatever it might be. But everyone is so socially conscious in the last couple of years, especially in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
So, but through it all, when it comes to collective matters, I try to remind people that they can't do anything about it. So keep breathing and just do the best that you can do. That actually I got from Carl Jung. Jung was very pessimistic in his writings about how the world would go, but he was very optimistic about how each individual can work on himself or herself, and that would help to change the world for the better.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So in part two, we're going to have a look at the
Let me
chart.
just,
Sorry.
just let me add this part. A friend of mine who's a Buddhist shared this with me some years ago. He told me that the Buddhists have no concept of worry, because if you're worried about something that you can do something about, then do something about it and stop worrying. And if you're worried about something that you can't do anything about, then accept that you can't do anything about it and stop worrying. That made my life a lot simpler.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's very useful in these months right now. Thank you. In part two, we're going to be looking at a chart that you've chosen. So thank you for being here, John. Thanks.